Hi y'all, in this video we are going to take a look at the histology of skin. So what you're looking at in this photo is a microscope image, a picture taken from our microscopes of plantar skin. This is skin on the bottom of your foot. What you need to be able to do with this diagram or this photo is to be able to recognize the two major distinct layers of the skin, which would be the epidermis and the dermis, and also recognize the individual layers of the epidermis and the individual layers of the dermis. So we're going to take a look at these parts really quickly. So first off, let's make sure that you can distinguish epidermis from dermis. Hopefully you can remember from the tissue chapter that the epidermis is keratinized stratified squamous. So we're going to start at the apical surface, which is up here at the top of the photo. This would be our apical surface, our free surface that's not touching anything. And that would go all the way down to kind of where the pattern changes, right about here. This is all going to be the epidermis. All of this is going to be epidermis. So I'm just going to kind of drag this label right over there to the side. You'll notice at the bottom of the epidermis, this is where the pattern changes, where you get these pink swirls all over the place. This is going to be your dense irregular connective tissue. So that's going to be the dermis. So I'm going to drag the label of the dermis there. And everywhere down below this is going to be the dermis. Now within the epidermis, remember the epidermis is keratinized stratified squamous. We're looking at thick skin. In the epidermis there are 5 major layers. We're going to start at the bottom and then work our way to the top. At the very bottom, right around in here, you can see it's very heavily nucleated cells. Lots of little purple dots all within that bottom layer. That's going to be the stratum basal layer. Stratum basal, think of basal and basement or bottom there. That's your bottom layer of cells. This is where the melanocytes reside. These cells are actively mitotic, constantly dividing and pushing up to the top, the surface, replacing cells that are being sloughed off on the surface due to excessive friction. Above the stratum basal layer, we have the stratum spinosum. Stratum spinosum is mainly composed of the keratinocytes. So right in here, this layer that's several layers, cell layers thick, this is all going to be stratum spinosum above the basal layer. Now as we work our way up through the stratum spinosum, we're getting so far away from the blood supply down in the dermis, because remember, epithelial tissue is avascular, no blood supply in the epidermis. So since we're getting pretty far away from the dermis down at the bottom where the blood vessels live, these keratinocytes are going to start to die. When that happens, we'll start to see a grainy appearance in the cells, and that's going to bring us up to the stratum granulosum. Now the granulosum is very thin. I tried to draw a little arrow right in there to the stratum granulosum. Very thin, dark nucleated area. The granulosum is a name, represents the grainy appearance that this layer has. Above the stratum granulosum, you have the stratum lucidum. Now the lucidum is the layer that's only present in thick skin. This is one of the differences between thick and thin skin. It's about the same depth or the same thickness as the granulosum is. It's very thin, and it typically will appear very translucent. So right in here, I'm going to try to draw an arrow right there. You can kind of see right up above the stratum granulosum where it gets really clear, see-through there. That's the stratum lucidum layer, okay? Now, everything above the stratum lucidum, that is all going to be the stratum corneum. So actually all of this through here to the very surface of the apical area, all the way down to that lucidum, this is all going to be the stratum corneum layer. Completely keratinized cells. All of these cells are dead cells. Okay? So, working our way from the top down, or superficial to deep, we have stratum corneum at the top. I'm going to label these number 1, stratum corneum at the top. Then we have the stratum lucidum number 2, stratum granulosum number 3, stratum spinosum number 4, And then the stratum basal layer, which is your very bottom layer of the epidermis down there at the bottom, that's number 5. Okay, now everything below that stratum basal layer where you see this lighter pink swirly colors, this is going to be the dermis. The dermis has 2 major layers to it, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. The papillary layer are these finger-like mountains, hills, and valleys that you see protruding upward into the epidermis. So I'm going to draw a couple of arrows here. This region right in here, you see a projection upward. There's one right here. We come around, there's another one right here. So you can kind of see all of these little fingers that are projecting upward into the epidermis. Those finger-like arrangement, that is called dermal papillae. So we call this the papillary layer. So I'm going to move my label, papillary layer, right in there. If you can kind of tell, my arrows are pointing up in those fingers that's there. And then the bottom layer below that papillary layer, that's the much thicker portion where all of your accessory structures are found. That's going to be the reticular layer. So actually everything down deep, right here at the bottom, below the papillary layer, this is all going to be the reticular layer of the dermis.